Craigslist. Great deals, right? Maybe not. Craigslist might have what you need, or maybe something you don't. Tonight, I'll tell you some true Craigslist horror stories that'll make you think twice before hitting reply. From haunted furniture, creepy sellers to nightmares that you can't escape. Creepy encounters that'll send shivers down your spine. And deals so bad, they'll have you checking under the bed all night. So, if you're brave enough to face the truth about online shopping gone wrong, stick around until the very end. Because on this channel, nightmares come with a price tag, and sometimes, that price is more than you bargained for. My name is Josh, and this story takes place during the summer between my second and third years of college. Like many students, I was working to earn some money. My job was at a call center, making sales over the phone. To say I disliked it would be an understatement. The fluorescent lights seemed to drain my energy with every minute I spent in my cubicle. So, I quit after less than a month. Although I was relieved to be out of there, my happiness was short-lived. School is expensive and I needed a way to pay my bills. While browsing the internet, I decided to check out Craigslist. After sending out a few applications, I looked at the odd jobs section, hoping to find something outdoors, maybe mowing lawns or doing yard work. One ad caught my eye. Seeking help with a home renovation. 1 day of work to tear down a wall on the upper level of an older house. Pay is $15 an hour for 8 hours. $15 per hour was way above minimum wage at the time, and getting paid to demolish a wall sounded like a great deal. I replied to the ad and hoped for the best. The next morning I checked my email and felt a surge of excitement when I saw the reply. It said I had the job. The homeowner, Brad, and I agreed that I would start the next morning. Brad's house was in an old but charming neighborhood, with houses probably over 100 years old. Tall trees lined the narrow street, casting long shadows from the morning sun. When I arrived, I walked up the stone path and knocked on the door, which was slightly open. A tall, hefty man with a warm smile opened it. He was probably in his early 30s. "You must be Josh," he said. "That's right. Are you Brad?" I replied. "Yes, sir, let me show you around." I stepped into the foyer, and he explained what he needed me to do. Brad had a friendly demeanor and seemed like a genuinely nice guy. Even though I was alone in a stranger's house, I felt at ease. "There are 2 bedrooms upstairs that I'm going to join into a single large room. I just need you to tear down the wall. The contractors are coming in next week to finish the work," he explained. "Sounds good to me," I nodded. It made sense to have the prep work done beforehand, and I was happy to have the opportunity. Brad led me up the stairs and into one of the rooms, where a sledgehammer and an axe were waiting. "That's it," Brad pointed at the wall, smiling. "I'll be at work, but you can call me if you need anything." "Sure. Thanks," I replied. After Brad left, I picked up the sledgehammer and lifted it over my shoulder to get a feel for its weight. I watched out the window as Brad's car drove away. I was all alone. With each swing of the sledgehammer, the pile of debris at the base of the wall grew larger. Before long, a hole formed in the plaster. That's when I noticed something inside the wall. It looked like an old rolled-up rug, covered in dust from the crushed plaster. I leaned in and pushed it with the hammer. To my horror, it turned over, revealing what looked like a mummified face. I panicked, adrenaline surging through my body, and bolted out of the house, racing down the street. My mind was racing even faster. Was Brad hiding something? Why would he hire me to tear down a wall if there was something hidden inside it? Nothing made sense. When I felt safe, I called the police. They conducted an investigation and later informed me of the details. According to their experts, the body had been dead for at least 40 years, ruling out Brad since he wouldn't have been born at the time. Over the next few months, more details emerged, and I followed the story on the news. It turned out the house once belonged to someone who had committed terrible crimes in our city in the 1980s. He had passed away in prison several years before this incident. I never spoke to Brad again, but I can only imagine he was as shaken as I was. It's unsettling to think he lived in that house for years before the discovery. If there's one positive thing that came out of this, it's that the victim's family could finally have some closure. I had been out of work for a few weeks and was desperate to find anything that would pay. One day I was scrolling through Craigslist when an ad caught my attention. It was a simple ad, someone looking for help with odd jobs around their house for a day. I was hoping to find something permanent, but a day of work was better than nothing. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to cover my bills for a few days. I replied to the ad and, to my surprise, got a response within minutes. The man on the other end introduced himself as Terry and gave me his address. He explained that his house was being refinished and needed someone to come in and clean up the mess. I thought that was a little strange because I assumed contractors would clean up after themselves, but maybe not. The next morning, I rode my bike over to Terry's house, a small 2-story brick house in a quiet neighborhood. I rang the doorbell and waited. The door opened and Terry greeted me with a smile. He was a middle-aged man, balding with a slight belly. He wore a stained white t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants. "Good morning," he said as he stepped aside to let me in. "Good morning," I replied, stepping into his living room. The room was well lit with light blue walls and a large brown sofa in the center. A coffee table in front of the sofa had a few magazines scattered across it. There was no sign of any construction work, which confused me slightly, but I figured it could be in a different part of the house. "Let me show you around," Terry said, leading me to the back of the house. We walked through the kitchen and into the backyard where there was a shed. Terry opened the door, and I saw a few tools and paint cans on the shelves. "I need you to organize this and clean it up a bit," he said, pointing at the shed. "Sure thing," I replied. I spent the next hour or so cleaning the shed and organizing the tools. When I finished, I went back into the house to let Terry know. "Good job," he said, smiling. "Now let me show you where the real work is." He led me down a flight of stairs to the basement. The basement was dimly lit with a concrete floor and exposed pipes. There were a few boxes and a workbench in the corner, but no sign of any construction work. "I need you to clean up down here," Terry said, pointing at the corner. "There's a bit of a mess, but it shouldn't take you too long." I walked over to the corner and saw a pile of old newspapers and some dust on the floor. I started sweeping and cleaning, but felt like something wasn't right. Terry was standing in the corner watching me. As I was sweeping, I accidentally knocked over a box and a few items spilled out. I bent over and picked them up. They looked like a bunch of old pictures. I gathered a handful of them, ready to put them back in the box. Then one of the images caught my eye. It looked like some kind of strange role-playing thing. There were people tied up wearing unusual outfits. I was pretty weirded out by that and wanted to leave. I saw that Terry was gone and the door was closed. I walked up the stairs and tried to open it, but it was locked. "Terry," I called out. "What's going on?" But there was no response. I started to panic. I looked around the room for another way out and noticed a small window near the ceiling. It looked too small for me to fit through, but I could see outside. I pushed a few boxes under the window and managed to climb up and open it. I squeezed through the tiny space and ran to my bike, which was still locked up out front. As I rode away, I was shaking from the adrenaline. After I was a few miles away, I stopped and called the police. They came to Terry's house and talked to him, but he had an excuse for what happened. He told them that I was helping clean his house but was acting strangely. He said he thought I was on something, so he asked me to leave. He claimed I must have called the police to get back at him. It was all total nonsense, but the police didn't know that, and there was no evidence of any wrongdoing. I was frustrated and scared that nothing could be done, and that Terry would continue to post ads on Craigslist, potentially preying on unsuspecting people. I knew I had to warn others, so I decided to post an ad on Craigslist to tell people about him. I described the situation in detail and urged others to be careful when responding to ads like Terry's. Whenever I look back at this incident, I realize how lucky I was to have escaped. There's no telling what Terry's intentions were, but they certainly weren't good. This happened over 10 years ago when I was in college. I lived with my parents and commuted to school, which was about a 1-hour bus ride each way. A few days each week I would go out for drinks or hang out with friends after class. I had a locker on campus where I usually stashed my school stuff, so I wouldn't have to carry it around when I went out. The building with my locker was open late, so it was perfect for that. One Thursday after class, I put my school bag in my locker. It had my laptop in it, an Acer that was almost 4 years old. Not super high-end, but I used it every day. Then I went over to my friend's place near the school. We hung out for a bit and then went to one of the nearby pubs. Around 10 p.m., I decided to head home. When I went back to my locker, I noticed the lock was broken. I opened the locker, and not surprisingly, my bag was gone. I found a security guard and reported what happened. We reviewed the security footage and saw someone discreetly breaking into my locker. He was wearing a large hoodie and had his face covered, so it wasn't looking good for me. The laptop had most of my schoolwork on it, and I was really upset, scared that I would fail some of my classes because of it. The next day, I borrowed my mom's laptop. She barely used it anyway. I managed to get into all of my school accounts and emailed several of my professors, hoping they would make an exception since some of my assignments were due soon. The next night, I was in my room surfing the web on my mom's computer. On a whim, I decided to search Craigslist for laptops similar to mine. To my surprise, I found a listing that matched my laptop exactly, right down to the distinctive scratch on the corner where I had accidentally dropped it a few months back. The seller was asking only $100, and I knew it was mine. I messaged the seller pretending to be an interested buyer. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near the school. My plan was simple. I would confront the seller and demand my laptop back. I hoped he'd be scared enough to simply let me have it. If I got it back without any trouble, I was prepared to let it go and not press any charges. That was my offer anyway. On the day of the meetup, I was really nervous. I brought my friend Dan to back me up just in case the thief could be dangerous, but I was kind of excited to confront him. I kept thinking about all the ways it could go wrong, but I was determined to get my laptop back. Dan and I arrived at the coffee shop early and waited. A few minutes went by and a guy around my age walked in. He had a backpack with him and looked around nervously before spotting me and coming over. "Are you here for the laptop?" he asked. "Yeah, that's me," I replied, trying to sound casual. He pulled the laptop out of his backpack and handed it to me. I recognized it immediately. It was definitely mine. I then placed it on the table and turned it on. Once the login screen came up, I realized he had reset it. All of my work was definitely gone. I was hoping he wouldn't have done that, but I wasn't so lucky. I leaned over and picked it up, then closed it and slid it a few feet away from him. "This is mine," I said, looking up at the guy. "It was stolen from my locker at school. I'm taking it back." The guy's eyes widened with surprise, and then his expression turned to anger. "What are you talking about? This is my laptop. I bought it from a friend." "No, it's definitely mine," I insisted, holding on to it. "See the scratch here? I did that. And this sticker on the back? I put that there." He reached out to grab the laptop back, but I pulled it away. "I'm not giving it to you. It's mine and it was stolen. I won't call the cops if you just walk away now." He got really mad, his face turning beet red. Then he stood up as if he was going to fight me. We were causing a scene and people in the coffee shop were starting to look at us. The guy was seething, and he lunged at me trying to grab the laptop. I pulled away again and he lost his balance and crashed into a table. After that, one of the employees came over and said, "I think you better leave." That sounded like a great idea to me. The guy glared at me one last time before picking up his backpack and storming off. I left with my laptop in my hands. I couldn't believe I actually found it and managed to get it back. As for the guy who posted it on Craigslist, I don't know for sure if he was the thief or if he really did buy it from his friend. Maybe his friend was the thief. That doesn't make any sense, though. Why would you buy a laptop and then post it on Craigslist a day later? The really awkward thing is that he was actually a student at my school, and I would see him around now and then. I think he was in a different year than me, so we didn't really know any of the same people. Whenever we would cross paths, there would be a tense moment. I actually did report him for stealing my laptop, but he denied it, and security simply let it go. I don't know if there wasn't enough evidence or if they were just lazy, but he never got in trouble. I was just glad to have it back. I've used Craigslist on and off over the years, mostly for buying, but I did some selling as well. Nothing too crazy happened until this particular story. The worst thing before this was when I bought a laptop and found some weird, inappropriate videos on it. It was creepy, but I just deleted them. I still can't believe people don't erase their laptops before selling them. A few years out of college, I was sharing a house with my two good friends, Josh and Ben. For various reasons, we were splitting up. I had taken a job in a different state, and Josh and Ben had not been getting along for the last year. Since I was leaving, we all decided to go our separate ways. Otherwise, they might have just found a new roommate. My new job was over 10 hours away, so the move was going to be a real hassle. Because of that, I needed to get rid of most of my stuff. The big stuff had to go for sure. I decided to sell everything on Craigslist, thinking it would be the quickest way to clear out the house. I listed my items, my bed frame, a TV, and the kitchen table and chairs. By the time I listed them, both of my roommates had already moved out, so it was just me in the house. There was no couch because Josh took it to his new apartment. A few days after listing the items, I got a response. His name was Andrew, and he was interested in the kitchen set. He wanted to come by to see it and asked for a few extra pictures, which I was happy to send. We then talked on the phone briefly. I thought that was a good idea just so I could get an idea of who I was allowing into my house. Once that was done, we arranged a time and I gave him the address. The day he was supposed to come, I spent the morning cleaning the house and making sure everything looked all right. Right on time, I heard a knock on the door. I walked over to answer it, and a man around my age stood in the doorway. He introduced himself as Andrew. I invited him in right away, but as soon as he walked in, another guy appeared out of nowhere. I almost closed the door right in his face, but managed to stop myself just in time. "That's my brother. He's here to help me carry the table," Andrew said. A few things set off red flags for me. For one, the table was not heavy enough, and neither were the chairs. One person could easily handle it. Secondly, the other guy looked nothing like Andrew. He was bigger and at least 10 years older. He was about 6'2" and overweight, probably at least 300 pounds. He was bald and wore a white sleeveless t-shirt. It wasn't impossible by any means, but I did think it was suspicious. In any case, I was feeling nervous with these two strange guys in my place. Like I said, my roommates were already gone, so I had nobody to back me up if I needed it. I tried to look past my concerns and showed them the table. They walked around it for at least 2 whole minutes, a long time since it was just a basic table. Eventually, they nodded and murmured in approval. "So we're good then?" I asked timidly. The two men turned around and looked at me, but they didn't say a word. I was standing against the wall in the corner of the room and feeling claustrophobic. Andrew's brother took a big step towards me and, to my shock, grabbed me. I tried to fight him off, but he managed to restrain both of my arms with just one of his. I was no match for that guy. He pressed me into the corner of the room and held me there. I gave up fighting back, not wanting to make things worse. While I was being held, I could hear Andrew ransacking the house. There was still my TV in the living room and my laptop in my bedroom on the floor. I was hoping they wouldn't take that because it had some important stuff on it. I couldn't see much, but I heard Andrew make a few trips out the front door. After about 10 minutes, they must have decided they had taken enough because they released me and headed for the door. They left the kitchen table and chairs, though. It was clear they never even intended to buy them. After they left, I locked the door and slid to the floor, shaking. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I was supposed to be moving to a new city for a fresh start, and instead, I'd been robbed in my own home. I didn't even bother trying to chase them or get a license plate. At that moment, I just wanted them gone. When I checked the house, I saw that they took my TV, my Xbox, and a couple hundred in cash. Luckily, my laptop was still there. It was about 5 years old and in rough shape, so I guess that's why they left it. I called the police and they came to my house. They checked out our messages on Craigslist and I tried to describe the two men. I could tell they weren't optimistic about catching them, though. After all, I didn't know these men. I didn't know their names, and I didn't know if any of the information on Craigslist was real. I managed to sell the rest of my stuff, but I was much more careful and always had a friend with me. This incident left me paranoid and scared, but I needed to get rid of my things before I moved. Eventually, the time came for me to leave. As I drove away from that house for the last time, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. I was eager to put the whole ordeal behind me and start over. I lived in that house for over 4 years and had some great times there. But now, whenever I think about that place, I just remember one of the worst experiences of my life.